Today's episode, I'm going to be talking with Shawn, who was a lawyer, decided to quit his job, and start his own chocolate business, which is something we've all thought about at one time or another. He's got an extremely inspirational story, and let's get into the show. First off, Shawn, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Let's start with your story, because obviously, as I alluded to, you have an amazing story. So you can tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I was a criminal defense lawyer for about 20 years and specialized in really serious criminal cases, mostly felonies, upper grade felonies. And I did this for a long time, loved it, and then I stopped loving it. And this is the kind of job that you really need to be all in because the stakes are so high, in murder cases and other kind of cases like that. And so I began to search for something else to do. And really, it was a matter of prayer for me for about 5 years. A really just fervent, simple prayer of, please, God, give me something else to do for about 5 years.
Yeah. Was there was there a reason, like during these 5 years, that you didn't like your job? Because I assume at one point you enjoyed. Obviously, you put a lot of time into wanting to be a lawyer. So was there did you have to defend someone that you didn't want to defend, or what started that domino process?
No, it really wasn't one thing or defending somebody that I didn't want to defend. I really believed and believe in our criminal justice system, and no, it was one murder case in particular, one of the ones toward the end of my career, at the end of a trial. And there was kind of a moment in that case where I could just tell that, this was kind of a pivot point for me. It wasn't anything about the case or evidence in the case or anything like that, or, some late confession or anything. It was just, an emotional sense that I had that I needed to look for something else. And I guess you could say there was sort of a cumulative effect, of all of this, because it really is a very high stress kind of job, and with death threats and things like that. And none of that really bothered me. But I just knew it was time to go.
And so then you talked about finding, praying and trying to figure out what your next thing would be. So what was the path? How did you go from criminal defense attorney to chocolatier?
And I get this question a lot.
I'm sure.
And I've been doing this now for almost 9 years. And the path was one that was not easy. I'm writing a book about it now. And it's part of it, details this process. But I am a type A person, a little bit maybe less than I was 10 years ago. I'm maybe an A minus now. But and the particular difficult challenge for type A driven individuals is that they're all and we are all very task oriented, work hard, get to the next level. But when it comes time to really being able to look inward, reflect, and plan and reflect again, that's a little more challenging for type A driven people. And so it was hard for me. It took, like I said, it took 5 years. And I really had a sense that it would have something to do in the food industry. I didn't really have any hobbies as a lawyer. I just pretty much worked all the time and prepared for cross-examining people. And so I started grilling Big Green Egg, and then I started more grilling and more, and then I started baking, and then I started making chocolate desserts. And ultimately, that led to making chocolate in my kitchen at my law office, and the paralegals and secretaries would help me. So I might be, in the morning I could be in court on a meth lab sentencing case, and in the afternoon I'd be making chocolate. So it was a little weird for a while, but like many things, it's hard to do both. I really couldn't be bivocational. I needed to pick one. So that's what I did.
And then, so the moment, let's say that you transitioned from being a lawyer to actually starting the chocolate business, did you already have some sales doing the chocolate, or was it still a hobby at that point? Let's talk a little bit about that.
When I actually made the transition, there was, and this is true for anyone who really is deep in a business and making a transition to another career. Well, at least in my case, there were no sales. This was hobby, and I had to really come up with a pretty intricate plan on how to transition out of my law practice, because it's not like flipping a switch and all of a sudden your caseload is gone. These cases take a long time to unwind, so I took on a partner, and she helped me transition this caseload. And so that was part of the process, acquiring the real estate to, start my chocolate factory, learning how to do it. I really had no idea how to do it on a large scale. And that's an important lesson too, if I could just add parenthetically. I think a lot of people, have little hobbies that, well, let's just take baking, for instance. And maybe you might make some really good chocolate chip cookies, and your friends say, Travis, these are awesome. You really should start a chocolate chip cookie business. And you're like, oh, no. And they're like, no, really. And then somehow you're convinced that the cookie recipe that you have been baking in your kitchen, and you make your friends, a dozen at a time, that you can translate that into a business at much larger scale. And that is a myth that unfortunately a lot of people are either told and refuse to understand, or they're told and they don't understand, because it's hard to conceptualize. So for me, making chocolate, 1 pound at a time is much different than making it 500 pounds at a time. They're not even related. They're not even cousins. They're completely different.
So how were you able to go from, because obviously you're doing it very successfully now, so how'd you go from making it 1 pound at a time to figuring out how to make it 500 pounds at a time?
At the time that I started this chocolate business, there were really very few bean-to-bar chocolate, well, really only one other bean-to-bar chocolate maker in the United States, Scharfenberger, that sold to Hershey in 2005, the month that we started. And there were 2 or 3 of us in the United States starting at the same time. We weren't really sharing much information, as you might imagine, not a lot. And the people in Europe were the ones that really knew how to do it, and they were sharing zero information. So this was much different than it is today. There's a lot of information available throughout the United States on how to start a bean-to-bar chocolate factory. There was nothing. I mean, I traveled to South America. I traveled a lot to learn how to do this. I had to learn how to acquire the beans and all that stuff. So,
can you define what is a bean-to-bar chocolate bar?
The cocoa beans grow on, they grow in pods on trees 20 degrees north and south of the equator, so sort of the tropical band around the globe. And these beans are harvested by very poor farmers in most cases. And once they're harvested and fermented and dried, and I acquire them, source them directly from farmers, and import them directly to our factory in the U.S., then we roast the beans and then go about a very intricate process in turning a cocoa bean into an actual chocolate bar.
What was, when you started this business, what was the first point where you decided, like your first success point, the first time that you felt like this is actually going good? Because as someone else that started a business, I know there were a few months when I first started my business and I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. And
Yeah.
for me, it was, we had 3 days in a row where we had $500 sales. And I'm like, oh my God, if I can get 3 days in a row of $500 sales, I can potentially, do more, and et cetera. Was there a moment like that for you?
No, no, really not. Actually, and I've been doing this actively for, the first chocolate bar was sold in May of 2007.
Okay.
We probably started to become a profitable company just a couple of years after that. And then a couple of years after that, routinely profitable. But I don't even really know if I've completely thought that even today.
That's type A personality all the way, though.
Well, I mean, and I would say that there are moments where I believe that the success of the business is transcended by other things than, double-digit sales growth, which we've experienced every year, or things like that. For instance, what I mean by that is there are things that have happened in the business and related to the business, but unrelated to chocolate sales, that have given me the sense that if it all folded up today and I ended up in bankruptcy court, that I would still have been a success personally in the business, because of the things that we've been able to impact and affect around the world and here in our own little neighborhood, that are, these are the kind of things that are permanent. They're things that can't be taken away, by negative cash flow, debt, and these are the kind of things that make me think the business is a success, but more importantly, personally, I'm successful.
Do you have an example of one of those?
Sure. Every other year, we take local high school students to Tanzania in a program called Chocolate University. And these are very bright students. It's a really competitive program to be part of this. And over half of the students that we take are not only bright, but they're also financially not as on par with other people who might be able to afford this kind of experience. And so they're scholarship students in this program. And for them and the other students, having this peak experience, if you will, is transformative for them. And there are moments while we're in Tanzania, and I witness these students just literally open their hearts in ways that they might not otherwise have experienced. And when I see that and other things like that, I think, okay, this is good. I could go to heaven now and it'd be just fine. It's pretty much over. That's why I don't really. There are many, many things like that. For instance, we're feeding 1,600 kids a day.
Wow.
School lunch, completely sustainable, no donations. We started this program. We're approaching 1 million meals at our little company. We only have 15 full-time employees.
Wow.
So when I think about things like that, I think, these are kids for several years who've had food that would not have otherwise had a lunch, school lunch in Tanzania and the Philippines. And so that's not going anywhere. That's a fact that happened. And there are many, 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 many things like that.
That's awesome. I want to go back and talk a little bit more about starting the business. And my question to you is, if there was someone, let's say a young person, let's say in their 20s, who was quitting their job, a similar situation as you, and they were starting a business, is there any advice that you'd give to them that you wish you would have had when you were first starting your business? Obviously, no secret chocolate recipes, but
well, the first thing is I didn't, and this is an important distinction, I didn't start my business in my 20s. I really built a career and a lifetime of what some would say is professional success. I worked very hard, too hard, to build my reputation and to become known as someone that, at least in my neck of the woods, that you would want to call if you were in trouble. And I was able to charge a lot of money for that. And I made a lot of money. And I saved a lot of money. And that money is now all in a chocolate factory. All of it. All of it. I cashed in, retirement savings accounts and those kind of things right before the recession hit. So that was kind of good news. I had to pay a penalty, but it was worth it. And so the reason I'm drawing that distinction is because I want to encourage young people to really straddle that tension between following the thing that they want to do and recognizing and understanding that could be a very long-term plan in place that they need to execute in order to see it happen. And in my case, I didn't think, when I got out of law school, I was going to start a chocolate factory, but I was open to the idea of doing other things, from that moment. And so I think it's important to just recognize that it can take a long time. And so what that means is that for 20 years, did I have the itch to do other things during those 20 years? Yes, I did. But there's something to be said for dedicating yourself to a job and doing it even when it sucks, even when it really sucks. And I think that's kind of a lost art. And I've noticed this just in the last 5 to 10 years. And one of the reasons for that is because we are afforded a great deal of perceived mobility. And it sometimes doesn't work out that way. And so I fear that we're losing a sense of, and I'm included in this, but I think we're losing a sense of what it's like to dedicate yourself to something for a long time and make that thing that you're doing meaningful, and not looking for a title that will make what you're doing more meaningful than it is. And so people could say, your audience could say, well, that's easy for you to say, you did what you did, but I also had 20 years of putting some time under my belt. And our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents didn't have this kind of not even perceived mobility. If we would have asked your grandfather, who, was he probably from Italy, or your great-grandfather was from Italy, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. If we would have said to him, hey, you really need to follow your dream. You need to go to, he would not have understood. I don't care how great your Italian was, he would not have understood that. Because it was not, he couldn't conceptualize that. Sure. Because he did his job to provide for his family and to keep them safe. And so that's one. The second thing I would say from a practical standpoint to a young person is to seek out people who have a really depth of knowledge of finance. And I don't mean accounting, I mean finance. And I really, when I talk to young people around the country and here in my town, I really encourage them to really study accounting and finance as much as they may hate it, if they ever want to have their own business, because, and it's something that I wish that I had even sought out more when I was starting my business, because there aren't that many people who really understand small business finance. And it's very, very important. And I think people are often led astray in starting new businesses by thinking that their cash requirements aren't as large as they really, truly are. And one of the ways to figure that out and really unravel that difficult and challenging problem is by engaging somebody who really understands finance, if you don't. So that would have helped me, I think.
Yeah, that was a problem for us as well. Like, I've always been very good with my personal finances in the sense of I don't spend money that I don't have. Mm-hmm. It is a little bit different with a business. You need to track everything, and if for no other reasons than for taxes, with your personal taxes, it's I made this much money, I got to pay this much. With business, it's a lot more involved.
Right, and it's not just tracking, it's forecasting.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is being able to forecast cash flow, being able to forecast what kind of debt will need to be incurred, essentially capital. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think a lot of people fall short, not just young people, but all people. One of the ways that we are most likely to see evidence of financial illiteracy is in the misunderstanding of cash needs for a business to obtain lift. And sometimes the runway is just not long enough. And that's why we see so many failures, I think.
When you first were starting your business, so there's I don't know if you ever read the book Think and Grow Rich, but in that book, it's Napoleon Hill. He went around and interviewed like 500 of the most successful people and tried to figure out what do these people have in common. One of the things he found out was like 99% of them, their biggest success came after they were about ready to quit. And as a small business owner, we've all had that experience of like, I'm ready to quit. What was like one of your first big failures, if there was one that made you be like, man, I don't know about this?
Hmm. I had quit my law practice that I was making a lot of money in. I'd purchased the building. We'd started renovating the building. I'd purchased equipment from all over the world that I didn't really understand how to use. And one of the really technical aspects of making chocolate is called tempering. The chocolate has to be tempered, sort of like glass or steel, binding molecules together, so that the chocolate bar will be shiny and glossy and it will snap and hold together. And that's not that easy. And there was a time when I was in the molding room of our chocolate factory before we ever sold any chocolate bars, and we couldn't get the chocolate to temper. And I'd consulted experts that would, talk to me, and it was really almost impossible. And I remember day after day after day, really several months of standing at that piece of equipment in a 20 by 20 space, trying to figure it out, and it wasn't happening, and wasn't happening, and wasn't happening. And I really did think, even before I was going to sell my first chocolate bar, that it was impossible. And I really thought about quitting before it ever even started.
And how did you finally figure that out? How'd you get past that?
The way I got past that, and this is the way people often get past problems like this, is by opening my checkbook and spending more money. And what ended up happening is I talked with a consultant who is a really trusted expert in chocolate around the world, even today. And he talked about these pieces of equipment made in Europe. And so I bought a German tempering machine. And, it was like $40,000, and that was a lot of money, and still is a lot of money. But it worked, So it's just a matter of spending money often to solve problems.
That's another, I think, hard mindset shift, or at least it was for me, and I think most small business owners, was this realization that, I can't always figure everything out, or even if I can figure it out, sometimes it's better just to hire someone that's an expert on it. And
That's right.
it's tough because I've had this experience with accounting, actually. We ended up having to hire someone, and I'm like, I know I can figure this out. Like, I understand. I went to school for engineering. Like, I understand math, but there was just little things that she's like, oh, no, that should be in this category, not that. And I'm like, oh, it's all solved. That
Yeah.
$100 well spent or whatever.
Oh, that's true. I mean, that's right. I mean, as Clint Eastwood said, a man's got to know his limitations. And I've been learning mine and accepting them every day I've been in business.
Another question for you. When we didn't really talk a lot about this, but when you were quitting your job, what did people around you say? Did you tell them like, I'm going to quit to start a chocolate company? And I'm sure you got some interesting reactions.
Yes, there's a pretty tight-knit group of lawyers in our area, in our community. And I think most of them across the board, both young and old, thought that I'd lost my mind. And not many people really told me to my face, but I knew that it was kind of under discussion at the courthouse. But I didn't even think about it. I mean, there was zero thought that other lawyers thought that I was crazy. I could have cared less what they thought. Didn't bother me at all.
That's a good reaction. It was when I was quitting my job. There was definitely times, especially when people close to me were questioning my judgment, because at the time I was making a good amount of money. I was probably making close to as much money as my dad. So to him, he's like, how can you quit your job? Like, what are you doing? I'm like, this isn't, I hate it. I hated it. And I'm like, I know the bigger thing for me, the funny thing that finally convinced him was I told him, look, I have a ceiling at this job. I can make, let's say, $100,000 a year if I bust my ass for the next 3 years. If I start my own company, I think I'm worth more than that. I think I can do something bigger. And he's like, all right, you got to go do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you raise a good point too, because those people that I mentioned who thought I was crazy, they weren't really that close to me. They were my professional um, acquaintances, colleagues, if you will. But the lawyer that helped me transition my caseload didn't think I was crazy, and she's was and is a very good friend and believed in me trying to do this. And I think successful businesses are not don't become successful in a vacuum. There's a lot of people in support, and that's a good example. She is a good friend and really worked hard to help me achieve this thing that I wanted to try. But I would say, but almost all of my other friends, even, and many of my family members, thought that I was insane too. So it was okay.
Yeah, that's was definitely my experience. So one of the things, referring to your story as well, I found coworkers, and it sounds like similar to you, like other lawyers, they almost have to think you're crazy because if they think, oh, that's a really good idea, then it starts to make them question, well, why don't I quit the job as well? And
Exactly. And what's interesting is over the years, I've had a number of lawyers and other people come to me privately saying, I hate my job. I want to tell me, how do you do it? What are the steps? And, because many people, as we've discussed, are just not satisfied.
yeah. So I want to be respectful of your time, but I have one last big question for you. And this is just, do you have any general advice? And we talked about a couple different things throughout the episode, but general advice for people in their 20s that you think that everyone should know?
I think there are a couple of things. First of all, and these are things that I wish that I'd paid more attention to. Um, I wish that I would have been a little bit better in my 20s at, and this is going to sound kind of new agey, but I wish that I had been more self-aware um, because I was so driven to do well in law school and to work for a good firm and a respected firm and make a lot of money and win cases and become known for winning that I I really I didn't make time for anything else. And I think yes, it's true that drive is what has probably propelled me with momentum through what I'm doing now. But I might have been willing to even trade some of that if I would have spent some time in my 20s trying to become a little bit more self-aware. And because I spent a lot of time on that now, we haven't talked about this, but um, I've, over the last 15 years, been really involved in a Trappist monastery about an hour and a half from my house, speaking of which. And the, the, and it's been kind of a center point for me in the last 15 years of my life, and to the point that I've become a family brother at this monastery. And um, I wish that I would have had the guts and the discipline to throttle back some of my career push in my 20s to be just a little bit more aware of things like joy and love and these other things that give meaning to anything that we do. Doesn't matter. That's one. And you might imagine, based on some of the things that we've talked about, but I wish that I would have spent some time really teaching myself finance.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this for people who are, designers and artists and musicians, and just please have an understanding of finance so that people won't steal from you, so you're not going to get cheated, and so you can run your business. And I really believe that small business is one of the answers to the world's problems. Many, many problems, everything from access to healthcare to education to the economy and women's empowerment and And in order for that to happen, we need to have a degree of financial literacy that I believe will really come to light and could come to light to people in their 20s and even after college, to continue studying this important topic.
I want to dig in a little bit more about becoming more self-aware. Do you have any advice on, let's say someone listens to this and they're like, yes, I want to become more self-aware, but how do I do that? Do you have any advice on that?
Yes. I think one of the ways to do that is to sort of take an inventory of the things that you like to talk to your friends about, the things that you like to talk to your family about, the books that you like to read, the blogs you like to read, and inventory what those are and what those topics are and how it makes you feel. And that's not easy to do in this age of information. And so I encourage people to do that. I think that's one of the first steps. It can be at a church or synagogue or other religious institution. I think that there are many, many practices that are out there right now that, in fact, there's such a proliferation of mindfulness that it's almost kind of become ubiquitous and almost a joke, really. I saw the Headspace thing is going public, and I was like, really? We're going to do an IPO for mindfulness? It just seems so counterintuitive to me. I'm sure the guy's a nice guy. I saw his TED Talk, and he seems really nice and whatever, but it just seems antithetical to me. And anyway, so I think that's one of the first steps. And then I think another step is that, and this could exclude some people because maybe they haven't experienced pain, but I think to take a look at the pain that we've experienced in our lives and the suffering that we've had emotionally, physically, whatever, is a real great place to start looking at how sorrow is turned into joy. The writer, the philosopher Khalil Gibran said, I think it was around the turn of the century, but popularized in a book in the 60s, that our greatest joy is our sorrow unmasked. And it's true. And so one of the ways that young people, can get a sense of this for themselves is by exploring within themselves where the pain is. And what they find, paradoxically, is that that's where their greatest joy is. And so I think that's a way for people to become more self-aware. I think that developing one-on-one friendships and deepening relationships with family and friends is another way of becoming self-aware. And I think that it's also challenging in this day, especially for young people who are so busy. We're trying to do our thing, and it's hard. So I think taking time for personal friendships and family is a way also to deepen awareness.
That's great advice. Shawn, where can people find out more about you and more about your chocolate company?
Well, thank you for asking. We sell our chocolate throughout the United States in about 1,000 specialty food stores around the country. And we sell in some places around the world, but the best place is askinosie.com, our website. They can learn more about our story, how we engage our neighborhood and the children in the neighborhood, and how we engage people in the countries that we source our cocoa beans. And more importantly, they can buy our chocolate, and we ship all over the country. So thanks for asking.
A question for you too. I'm sure it's almost impossible, probably like picking one of your favorite child, but if there was one bar or one item that you're like, I highly recommend trying this for someone that's never tried your chocolate, do you have a recommendation?
Well, you're right. That is.
I figured that's a tough question.
It depends. For instance, for people who like dark chocolate, right now the Ecuador bar is a very popular bar. It's very robust. lots of flavor, really powerful. Only cocoa beans and organic sugar. We make our own cocoa butter. That one is a really good one. I go to these countries every year to source these beans myself and profit share with farmers, open our books to farmers. We didn't really talk about that, but so I get to experience these farmers and have relationships with them. And so when I pick a bar, it's kind of like, which friends am I going to pick? But I think the Ecuador bar is particularly good right now. We just came out with a new product that took us 14 months to figure out how to make, and it's malted milk balls.
I saw those.
Those are just literally selling out, and but we just weren't sure, how much to make to start. So we're already working on the weekends to catch up with that, especially during this holiday season. But those are going to be very, very, very popular. More of a candy, but really with great chocolate. Our peppermint bark will be coming out soon. We've become kind of famous for that. We only make a certain amount of it, and it sells out very quickly. But those are things that I think people would enjoy. And but I appreciate you asking me about that.
Absolutely. Shawn, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for doing what you do. This is really important.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. And if you did, make sure you hit the big red subscribe button down below. You can also check me out on Facebook and on Twitter. And I release a new video every Monday. And by hitting that subscribe button, you'll get those new videos every Monday. And this is really a podcast. It's also a website. You can check out the website. It's howtodoyour20s.com. I'll put a link right over here as well. And what it's all about is trying to improve your life. And we specifically focus on things that people in their 20s are interested in. So make sure you like the video if you liked it. Subscribe. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, whatever. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you again on another video.